Any questions, Mr. Doyle? In your opening comments, you certainly painted a very challenging picture for you, your company, and all of your employees to get through what you are still working to get through, because we're not through this. But in your testimony, you talk about critical machine parts that were quoted with a 12-week lead time turned into 29-week delays before you finally received those parts. That is an incredible management challenge, and I understand you've still been able to maintain your deliveries, which certainly speaks well to what you're able to do. But my question to you is that I know you're committed to doing most of your manufacturing in the United States, so your research and development, which is done in Rochester Hills. And as we look long-term on this challenge, because it'll continue to be a challenge going forward, could you speak to whether or not a good way to think about dealing with supply chain distributions from overseas is that we need to onshore more manufacturing here in the United States with American workers? Talk to me a little bit about that and how you would see that as something we should be thinking about as a policy direction.
Thank you for the question. I think that there's probably two thoughts that come to mind when that happens. One is the very personal one of our case about bringing a supply base onshore. We're a $50 million company, and our supplier of our principal materials is a multi-billion-dollar company, so our chances of asking them to think about the optimization of their manufacturing on our behalf is a little silly. That having been said, we're exactly involved in that conversation with them. We have been working with them on their costs. We both know that the logistics costs are non-value added to either of our operations. They are looking at manufacturing locations in the United States that would shorten our supply chain from, instead of Greece, it would be actually a place in the Midwest, which would be great. So while I think our ability to affect that is limited, that I do believe that it's something we're pushing for, and we're trying to do that to optimize our operation, shorten our supply chains, which makes it easier to manage our operations, reduced inventories, those sorts of things all go with shorter supply chains. So absolutely, we're asking those questions. From the motor vehicles kind of point of view, there's 30,000 parts that go into the manufacture of a vehicle, and the nature in which the way the supply chains have been developed over the course of the 30 years that I've been involved in this, particularly when you look at the incredible expansion of manufacturing of vehicles in China and in Europe in some cases, a global supply chain developed, and the manufacturers optimize that down to the minute. You know, when we're late a minute to our customers, the consequences of that are fairly severe. Therefore, I think when you look at that, that's a much bigger kind of question. On a personal side, I think that we've discovered over the course of the last couple of years that there are certain supplies, commodities, services that we need to protect and be careful about. And I would absolutely support giving serious consideration to some of those things being balanced in supply base. I think a lot of us have learned about single source of supply and the risk that goes with that. Secondary sources in the United States and other friendly places, I would absolutely endorse.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Doyle. And I realize as one company, you can't affect all of those changes, but it's about policy and how we make sure that we're providing companies like yours and others the ability to have supply networks that are based in the United States with American workers and make the logistics a whole lot easier than what we're seeing right now, but more importantly, create jobs and opportunities for Americans. And I applaud what you already are doing. You're doing that every day, so thank you for what you're doing, and we want to be able to try to support those activities. Mr. Butler, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, ocean carriers have reported record profits due to increasing the price of container shipments and increased demands for goods. Earlier this month, the Danish shipping company Maersk reported a net income of $17 billion. I understand it's their best quarter in more than 100 years. And we've seen an increase in container shipping pricing of 121% from just a year ago. Clearly, these record profits are good for the shipping industry, but have placed real challenges on businesses in Michigan, both large and small, as they try to deal with these increased shipping costs. We heard from Mr. Doyle what's going to happen later with his contract as a result of these large shipping costs. We've heard some testimony, and I've certainly heard from small suppliers in the automotive industry that these price increases are putting significant strain on those businesses. And large businesses like Leprino Foods, which operates 2 manufacturing facilities in Michigan, are being heavily impacted by current ocean shipping practices. Over 99% of Leprino's 2021 ocean shipments have been canceled, have been rebooked for a later date at least once, if not twice, and in some cases up to 10 times or more. And they've incurred millions of dollars in detention and demurrage fees on top of that. So my question for you, Mr. Butler, is what would you say to a company faced with the prospect of going out of business as a result of these exorbitant fees and practices? At the same time, ocean shippers are making record profits.
Well, thank you, Senator. As I said during my opening statement, we realize the conditions are difficult for folks all over the world, and got nothing but sympathy for people that are like Mr. Doyle's business who are dealing with those situations. The price situation right now is entirely unfamiliar to us. I mean, for the last 20 years, the ocean shipping business has been lucky to make its cost of capital. And what we're facing today is, you're absolutely correct. It's completely unprecedented, and it's purely the result of supply and demand in the market. A couple of things I would like to say about pricing. There are really 2 kinds of pricing in the industry. One is pricing under service contracts, which are long-term agreements between ocean carriers and their customers. Those rates have not gone up nearly as much as you hear with respect to these headline rates that often make it to the newspaper. The headline rates are in what's called the spot market, which is what it sounds like. It's you go out on tomorrow and ask what the rate is to move a box next week. And those are the rates where you're seeing the really eye-popping numbers. So one of the things we're seeing in the industry right now is a lot of our customers, shippers, really looking forward, wanting to make sure that they lock in capacity at a fixed rate under a service contract going forward. So that's just a little more background on that situation. The other piece with respect to pricing is that the ocean carriers that actually operate the ships are not the only actors in the market that price. There are far more middlemen, if you will, what they call non-vessel operating common carriers, or NVOCCs. Those folks buy space from our members and then resell it. And so that part of the market has also driven some of these pricing increases.
Well, as we're closing this hearing, I just want to kind of have one more question to think through. These are some of the points that came up, and Mr. Butler, you mentioned how the most valuable space is in our oceans there, and it's limited, and there's not much capacity to be able to actually expand those ports out there because of all the kind of development that's already occurred around them. It's difficult, and if you did, it's incredibly expensive. Then there's been issues related to moving cargo to other ports, and that's really what I want to explore, because I think there's a great opportunity for us to use the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway to a greater extent than is currently being used. Throughout history, it's been used very heavily, and you are able to bring cargo right into the heartland, right, Mr. Doyle, the heartland of America in Michigan and in our ports that we have in the Great Lakes. And if you're going to expand ports and have the capacity, you mentioned sometimes the capacity isn't there. If you're going to invest in capacity, it's a whole lot cheaper to do that with ports throughout the whole Great Lakes system that can handle additional freight that's coming in. But you have to have equitable access to federal resources, and you have to be held to the same standards. We find that the standards for Great Lakes ports are different than they are at other ports around the country, and that includes standards related to CBP and security issues. My question for you, Mr. Reagan, is that how would smaller seaports factor in and thinking about the Great Lakes and other areas, as long as there's equitable distribution of resources to make sure those ports can make the kinds of investments necessary? We know how powerful those investments can be. What are your thoughts?
I think they can play a really important role in expanding our durability when it comes to these types of crises and expand our capacity for moving goods. I think the more the investment that we make into these ports are capable of receiving larger vessels and capable of transporting them more quickly to rail and truck facilities, that is going to be the key to making sure they're successful. It's one thing to be able to bring a ship in and dock it. It's another thing to have the access to the rest of the country that makes that a viable financial option. So making sure that we have those intermodal facilities and having the facilities to be able to move it is the key to making that a success and improving our broader capacity.
Right, and certainly there's no shortage of intermodal capacity in the industrial Midwest with significant rail assets and highways and material that comes through there. Mr. Doyle, I'm sure if material came through the Port of Monroe, that's a whole lot closer to you than someplace else, and an opportunity for us to grow economies in those areas while also dealing with what is a significant problem. So certainly would look forward to chatting with each of our witnesses in the future about how we can think that through, because I think it's certainly an option that needs to be fully considered.